Hey everybody, welcome to SwJ. Today we're getting back into the blanket project, sewing some old t-shirts onto my blanket background that I made from 20 plus year old material, most of it. And we're going to be talking about saving native languages online, which is, I think, important for people of Indigenous heritage. We'll get into that as soon as I get a stitch in here. And I'm going to be using the my usual blanket stitch. So there is an Indigenous language teacher who is Inuit. And for those of you who don't know what the Inuit are, those are the most northerly native Canadians, the native people to those northern lands, the ones we traditionally picture in igloos with the dog sleds. You know, where a lot of the stereotypes of Canada come from. That's Inuit. The eating whale blubber, the bone sunglasses to avoid snow blindness. That all of those great Canadian stereotypes and things all come from the Inuit culture. Now, the Inuit language is dying and has been for a long time. And this is a massive effort to save that Indigenous language. So, some background history for this teacher is that her mother was the one who kept the language alive up until now. And her mother was a residential school survivor, is what they're calling them now. If you aren't familiar with residential schools, it's a dark point on Canadian history that Native children were taken from their families and forced into schools called residential schools, specifically made for changing Indigenous children into Christians. And I'm all for Christianity, don't get me wrong, but this was not done properly. And by not done properly, I mean to the tune of the most horrible atrocities you can think of. That the teachers were members of, I believe it was the Catholic Church, and they were the people who were being punished by the Catholic Church for indiscretions back in Europe. So anyone who the church wanted rid of because they had gotten into a certain position and they were bad people, they were sent to teach at residential schools. And I don't even want to get into all the things that were done to these children. But and the worst things that you can imagine were done. and they have recently uncovered mass graves around many of these residential schools where the children who were beaten too badly to survive were buried. And they're numbering in the thousands. So you can imagine an Indigenous youth in this situation trying to keep her native language alive. I can only imagine the abuse and the humiliation that she was put through to try to just speak her own language. My thread every once in a while twists up on me like this, and every once in a while it's a bit of a pain to untangle. So anyone who undergoes suffering like that to preserve something, it's only right that what they suffered for is preserved, and her daughter is doing that. Thankfully, due to technology, these things can be done now, and it can be a way for a lot of the Indigenous youth in Canada to reconnect with their culture. If they have their language back and can speak to each other in their own language, that's a huge cultural identity piece of the puzzle back in their favor. You know, a lot of Indigenous youth associate very strongly with black culture because of a similar dark history of oppression and abuse by white people. And I think it would be really awesome if more Indigenous youth would pick up their traditions, because there are some beautiful traditions in Native culture, and like it's all about living in harmony with nature. Unfortunately, you know, people always kill people, so there were warring tribes. They would fight each other. I don't understand war. I don't. Like, there's more than enough of everything to go around. There always has been, there always will be. There's always going to be ways of working around things. You know, if we do run out of certain resources, there's always a way around it. There's always some other technology. If the world just pooled their resources, we wouldn't have to fight. But it's happened since the dawn of time, and that's the thing with warring Indigenous tribes really doesn't make sense to me. And I think for the most part they were peaceful, but every once in a while, I don't know. You know, their existence is all about living in harmony with nature, and, you know, not destroying everything in their path. But they still fight. It's one thing I don't understand about human nature. I don't like fighting. I don't like confrontation. Well, you know, it's part of life. You know, you have to do it. You have to be good at it to get through life, really. And I think this is a great example for Indigenous people in general, because this person just went out and did this project. There's a lot of opportunity for Indigenous people now because of the recognition of what was done to them. And if any sort of Indigenous person has a desire and does a startup like this, they can make their living, their legacy from something like this with the help of the government if they self-start. And that's one thing I think goes a long way to showing the government that you are actually going to do what you say you're going to do, is by just doing it, and hopefully they'll support what you're doing later on. And even if they don't, at least the information is out there, you know. Even if you don't get to turn it into a career, at least you've done what your, you know, in this case, what your mother experienced horrible things to keep alive, you know, to keep this language alive. But so many resources available these days for people who want to do good things, do something for nothing, right? It's that whole do something for nothing movement that I've been trying to push. You know, if you have the love and the passion and the desire for it, just to put it out there, that's amazing, because then it's just out there. And if people recognize it, then great. If they don't, then so what? You know, just like me sitting here sewing, doing what I like doing, and trying to share the good news with everybody out there. One thing I wanted to share about the Inuit language is just how it's expressive, how differently expressive it is. They apparently have 12 different words for snow, depending on what kind of snow it is. But a lot of it's words based on sentiment. And for an example of that, there's a word that describes the feeling of being drawn to look out the window in expectation of someone's arrival. And I'm sure everyone knows this feeling. You're expecting someone to show up, and that feeling that you want to go look out the window, or even going and looking out the window, but it's the feeling of wanting to go and look out the window because someone should be there sometime in the future. And it's spelt, when converted to our alphabet, it is spelt IKT SUAR POK. IKTS UAR POK. The best that I can do with that is Ixorpok. And I think that's a great word. I like words and languages that describe feelings and certain situations and stuff succinctly, like with one word. German kind of does that. but they tend to just link a bunch of words. Like if they were to make up that word, it would be the German translation of the feeling of being drawn to look out a window with the expectation of someone's arrival. And they would just turn that into one word. So, the Inuit language has a bit of a unique beauty to it in that way. That it can say, it can draw a picture. It can say many things with one word. I think that's a good place to call it an episode, as I'm running into some issues on this stitch. Being a little bit stitchy. There we go. Alright, we can call that an episode, I think. Thanks so much for joining me. I really do appreciate you spending some time with me. I do appreciate the time we get to spend together. And yeah, till next time, keep chillin'. Don't forget your cookie. Peace.